Shalom from Israel. I'm Ariel Ben Abraham. This week we read Parshat Mikeitz. It says something like, "It came to pass." That's what Mikeitz means in Hebrew, or at the end of, literally. At the end of 2 full years that Pharaoh was dreaming, and behold, he was standing by the Nile and the river Nile. And behold, from the Nile were coming up 7 cows of handsome appearance and robust flesh, and they pastured in the marshland. We probably know this story that Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, had this dream. 7 cows, healthy cows, 7 skinny, ugly cows. Same thing with wheat. 7 ears of wheat, robust, healthy, and 7 ears of wheat, weak. Both the skinny cows and the weak ears of wheat devoured, swallowed the healthy cows and the healthy ears of wheat. In a deeper mystic meaning in the Hasidic tradition, the 7 dual qualities, so to speak, that there are 7 positive qualities, 7 negative qualities. Usually the 7 negative qualities are related to the 7 Canaanites nations, the nations which were settled in the land of Israel, called the land of Canaan, before Israel settled in this land. They represent negative tendencies in consciousness. Roughly, they are wrath, pride, envy, lust, indifference, indolence, cruelty. Basically, negative tendencies in consciousness. The opposite are goodness, generosity, compassion, solidarity, care, positive aspects of consciousness. They are some kind of summarized in 7 qualities, either positive or negative, but in general we can understand them as positive or qualities, tendencies in consciousness. Now, who's dreaming? The one who is dreaming is Pharaoh, the king of Egypt. We have said also that in the mystic Hasidic tradition, Pharaoh represents the egocentric tendencies in human consciousness. So it's the kind of quality in consciousness that make us separate from the unity of our surroundings in order to be us, separate from the rest. So yes, it's some kind of sense of individuality, but in this case, when they refer to ego, we're not referring to that kind of individuality that we all have, sense that we are individuals. We're talking about the things that make us pursue desires, fantasies, illusions out of a false feeling or belief of lack. It's like the moment that we don't know, that we know, or we have the belief, the feeling that we lack of something. I want that $5 million house. I lack of a $5 million house, something like that. Then ego says, do anything in order to get that $5 million house, even if it's impossible. So it's like the whole point of ego's fantasies and illusions and desires out of a feeling or belief of lack depends on what we consider priority in our lives. So, for example, what we need versus what we want. So it's like the moment that what we want is different from what we need. It's like we need we want to have something that we don't need. Then we have to pay attention to what is that. Is this something that is gonna make a benefit in my own well-being, or just in my feeling of lack of satisfaction or fulfillment? It's like I feel unfulfilled, unsatisfied. I need more. I want more. So it's not but I need more, it's like I want more. Then the idea of wanting is not necessarily something negative. So we really can want whatever we decide. That's not the issue here. The issue here, at what cost we're going to get what we want. If it's something that is going to be at the expense of other people or in detriment of others, then we have to make a big difference here. To make the story simple, the whole message simple, the point is what we want to have must be good, not just for us, but for everything and everybody around us. So it's like, if I have, for example, this $5 million house, and I have it, finally get the money, buy the house. The idea is that this house not just fulfills my desire of having a big house, but the satisfaction that I'm experiencing in my personal consciousness, either be ego or not, must be good for other people too. It's like, okay, I have this big house, I'm going to share this house with other people, so I'm happy and other people are happy. They're getting benefit from what I have, what I am and what I have. That's the whole point. The idea is that what we are and what we have has true value in direct proportion of being something beneficial or good for others. So if I have something valuable that is mine, is my possession, it's really not as good as it is if I do not share the goodness of it with others. So in other words, like this king who is alone in his kingdom with all his possessions. Then he asks himself, what is the point of having this big castle and lots of land and a lot of everything if I don't have anybody to share with? What would be the point? So let's think about that. So it's like, it's not having for having, it's like when I'm collecting things. Works of art, cars, houses, jewels. It's like, what's the real meaning of having those? Just for me, for my own satisfaction? Or really something that I can share, the satisfaction that I can share with others? So we are sharing our happiness. Our happiness starts making sense when we share this happiness with others. Now, of course, there's a lot of people who would say, I just want to be happy. I don't care about anything or anybody else. As long as I am happy in my own terms, I have no problem. I don't care about anything else. Well, in Judaism, it's not quite that way. In Judaism, we're happy in direct proportion to the happiness that we can have in our surroundings. So it's like whatever we have and whatever we are is not doing some benefit to other people, then there's no point. None whatsoever. So we have to pay attention then to what we need and what we want in direct proportion, in direct relation to our surroundings, people and circumstances. So whatever we are and whatever we have must be something good for other people too, not just for us. That's the point of life. So selfishness, egotistic desires that we have an experience in detriment or at the expense of the happiness of other people is out of the question. So the masochistic and sadistic behavior don't match here. Completely out of the picture. It's completely unacceptable. It's like, yeah, but I like pain. That doesn't work. Even if you like it, that's not the norm. By norm, we're not talking about the laws, pre-established laws of the way we must behave. It's always thinking about how the people can be getting some benefit, some goodness out of what we want to experience. Not the opposite. So like, I'm happy seeing other people suffering. That doesn't work. It's an ego's fantasies and illusions. So, the whole point of the 7 cows is about how ego is capable of creating something positive and something negative. We all have this potential. So we see this ego sitting by the river and then seeing all these 7 beautiful cows coming out of the river and then seeing these 7 negative, skinny cows was going to swallow up the good ones. It's like everything is coming from an unconsciousness. So we are able to build, to create something positive out of goodness, in the same way that we can create something negative out of evil, wickedness. So everything can be summarized to the point that all depends on the direction in which we take our consciousness. So we have said that God gave us free will, good and evil, in order to have free will. But evil is a reference, not a choice. So the choice is always good. That's what we want, as the cause and the effect of what we think, feel, say and do, and have. That's the ideal state for humankind. Goodness, and make goodness prevail. That's the whole point. So in this case, ego doesn't know what to do. I have this situation, what I'm gonna do with this situation? It's gonna be good or it's gonna be bad? What are my choices? 3 years, 2 years, 1 year, dreaming the same dream. What am I gonna do with this? Until Joseph comes up, coming to scene, and tell ego, tell Pharaoh, what to do. Just like this sense of direction, this sense of regency, the kind of royalty that rules for good, for the sake of goodness, is the one that has to prevail. So then Joseph come, here I am, this is what Pharaoh should do. And the scripture says that Joseph is telling Pharaoh, it is not me who is telling you this. God is telling you this. So there's a sense, there's a greater purpose, there's a greater cause for a greater effect. And that greater cause and that greater effect is God, God's love. So there's a purpose for goodness, for life, sustaining life. That's the whole point of goodness, sustaining life. And the point of evil is destroying life. So then we have to choose goodness. Everything is a moral story in the Torah, from the beginning to the end. And that's the whole essence, the whole fundamentals of Judaism. Make goodness prevail. So the Torah, the Hebrew Bible, was given to us for us Jews, Hebrews, to make good prevail. So we are meant to be, and we're supposed to be the good guys here. That's why we share in this. It's not just being the good guys for being the good guys. No, it's to fulfill the purpose of creation, which is goodness. And it's something that seems to be obvious around. It's like, do we need a Torah, a Hebrew Bible, to know that? And can you just take a look around and see how nature, how creation works? What agnostics call intelligent design. What is intelligent about? So we can see around that there's a purpose of life, for life. This is based on care, cooperation, love. So every animal species care, most of them, the great majority, for each other, for their own species to survive. And then we learn. So in the same way that most mammals care for each other, then we as humans, species, we must care for each other too. This is by watching. So this is the first part of the portion. Then in the second reading of the Torah, which is at the end, we're going to read something very, very important. It says, so after Pharaoh decided to give Joseph the regency, the authority to rule over Egypt and act according to the times that were coming, Pharaoh said to his servants, because the oral tradition says that the Pharaoh's ministers, they were questioning his authority. It's like, why are you naming Joseph, this guy who just came out of jail? You know, how come that you're going to give him so much power over your kingdom to rule? Then, to that concern, Pharaoh said to his servants, will we find anyone like this? A man in whom there is the Spirit of God? It's like the king is acknowledging that Joseph is talking is like the messenger of God. God is telling Joseph what to tell Pharaoh. So Pharaoh understands this, not because Joseph told him so, but also because Pharaoh recognizes that the Spirit of God is with Joseph. Now, we read before last week portion that a few times it was said in the scripture, it is said in the scripture that the Spirit of God was with Joseph. And we were discussing what is the point? How do we qualify to be the vessels of God's Spirit? How do we get God's Spirit to be with us as it was with Joseph? So the answer is very simple. We have to have, and do goodness. That's the premise. That's the prerequisite. Why? We have said in the blog, our blog here, God's ways do not coexist with anything different from their ways and attributes. In other words, if we are good, anything that is against goodness cannot coexist with goodness. Can't. The moment evil comes, goodness withdraws immediately. Goodness says, I don't belong. This is not part of me. It's not part of my nature. It is not part of my ways and attributes. So this is the way we have to understand what we have referred before in the blog and these commentaries in video. That the thing, regardless good and evil, is pretty black and white. It's either or. We cannot mix these things. We are either good or wicked, but not at the same time. That's the way the Torah and God is telling us to be. So every time that we make an alliance, kind of association with something different than the goodness that we're supposed to bear and be and have, we have problems. So the lesson here is to always keep in the reference, all the references that our consciousness may grasp in every level. Discernment, thought, mind, emotions, feelings, passions and instincts, speech and action. The reference and the choice must be goodness in order for God to be with us. God, in this case, God is nothing, is not anything abstract. It's something very concrete. Not in terms of defining God, but knowing His ways and attributes as He Himself describes them in His Torah. Like, you have to be good. You cannot mingle, mess up with evil and wickedness. We just can't. The idea is to pursue goodness as our true essence and identity and the purpose of our lives. So if we came from the goodness of God's love, then that's what we are, because we come from that goodness. Therefore, it is our identity. Hence, we have to act, be, and do accordingly. It's like we were raised with goodness, with love. Our parents cared for us when we were infants, children, adolescents. We had a supportive, positive environment in which we grew up. We're supposed to continue that trend of goodness. But suddenly in our life we decided to be selfish, to be egotistic, to separate from goodness and start being wicked. The question is why? It's like if our essence and true identity is love, why should we be something different than love? Good question. Food for thought. So in this case, will we find anyone like this Joseph, a man in whom there is the Spirit of God? So, we all want to have the whole point of the things that we write in the blog, what we call God's love, is based on our relationship with God, basically. It's like we want to know how to know our Creator. That is the ultimate purpose of every creature, to know our Creator. And by knowing, it's not about defining who He is, but to finding the means, the ways, the attributes, the qualities with which this Creator relates to us. And then we realize that these same attributes, ways, and qualities are the ones that we have to use in order to communicate and relate to Him. That's the idea. This is called the Torah. So we read the Torah, we see how it relates to His creation with us, the Jewish people. Then we start communicating and connecting, bonding with Him. And that's goodness. Then we have to be good. So it's like, it's not to communicate with Him and give Him goodness. We don't have to give Him anything. Actually, we receive from Him. So the way we relate to Him is by being, having, and doing goodness. That's the way we connect with Him. It's not talking to someone in front of us and saying, okay, you are compassionate, forgiving, you are merciful. Therefore, I know how you relate to me, nice, now we are communicating with each other. No. The idea is that's the way you are with your creation and with me and with us, with all your creation. Then, therefore, I'm going to be that way. I'm going to emulate you by doing what you do to your creation. Then I'm communicating and connecting with you. That's the whole point. So we have said that in Hebrew, the word mitzvah, which is commandment, is the semantic root, the meaning of the word is connection. So it's like when we do His commandments, we are actually connected to Him. Connection in terms of relationship. We are relating to Him. We are in contact with Him. We're connected to Him. So we're not going to be able to know by definition our Creator. but we can know him through his ways. And then we have to make his ways our ways in the material world. Then he will be with us. It's like we are real children of the goodness from which we came from. Then we honor our origin, our Creator, our Father. That's the whole point. So here we have 7 tendencies, trends to positive, and 7 negative trends to wickedness, to evil, destruction, uselessness. Then how do we make one prevail over the other? That's the whole story. So how we avoid these negative tendencies to swallow the goodness. We have to protect, we have to enhance, we have to nurture, we have to expand the power of goodness so we can overcome, can subjugate the opposite nature, their opposite qualities, the evil ones, in order to avoid destruction and be able to survive, to honor life, to protect life. That's the idea. So, we continue. Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, "Since God has let you know all this," the prophecy, "there is no one as understanding, as wise as you." In other words, when we know the ways that God uses to relate to his creation, we know how to do the same thing with our lives individually and with our surroundings, our circumstances. We have the references clear to do what is right, and we do it. So then Pharaoh gives Joseph powers that he would do whatever he needs to do in order to save the country and to guarantee the survival of people. And it's interesting because he says to Joseph, "I am Pharaoh, and besides you, no one may lift his hand or his foot in the entire land of Egypt." In other words, Pharaoh is delegating, is giving all these powers to Joseph to rule the land. So it's like, besides me. Now, let's go back to the dynamics of what Pharaoh and Joseph represent. Pharaoh, we have said, is egos. Egos drive. So it's like, it seems to be like ego is before love. So it's like our drive to be, to exist, called ego. We're talking about ego unconditionally, not putting any labels, like it's good or bad or anything like that. No, we're talking about ego as the driving vital force in life. The self-preservating force that strives to make us survive. The driving force doesn't have that kind of rationality or discernment. It just acts. It's like instinct. Just like ego can be defined as part of our instincts, a driving force that, so to speak, safeguards our life, our existence. That's probably the less labeled definition of ego. So it's like, I'm the one who guarantees life. Then after that, after what I, besides me, then you come, love, and do the right thing in order to secure my survival, my well-being, and the well-being of my people. In this case, the people, the Egyptians, the people who were living in Egypt, and all the qualities, dimensions, and aspects of consciousness. So what we think, what we feel, thoughts, qualities, skills, talents. So these have to be guided by Joseph, by love's ways and attributes, in order to safeguard life and survival. So this is very important. So then they say that Pharaoh gave Joseph kind of Egyptian name, gave him a wife, a woman to marry, and then the journey starts. Now, it's a very interesting thing regarding the children of Joseph. So the firstborn was Manasseh, the firstborn of Joseph, which means, for God has caused me to forget all my toil and all my father's house. So it's like all the troubles that he had gone through, Joseph, was forgotten with the birth of his firstborn. And then the second, which sounds like some kind of interesting too, Ephraim. For God has made me fruitful in the land of my affliction. This is very, very important. And it's interesting because later, Jacob, when he is going to give the blessings to all his children, including Joseph's children, as his own, he decided to make Ephraim the firstborn of Joseph. So it's interesting that the name Ephraim, God has made me fruitful in the land of my affliction, has a very powerful meaning regarding the destiny and the future of Israel. Because we later would know that Joseph became the firstborn. Reuben was the firstborn, but then Jacob decided to make Joseph the firstborn, who's going to get the first blessings. And then the firstborn of Joseph will be, instead of Manasseh, by Jacob's decision, is going to be Ephraim. So the line of the birthright is kept by the tribe of Ephraim, which means God has made me fruitful in the land of my affliction. Why? Why the firstborn changed that name? In other words, from Joseph to Ephraim. For the future generation, the firstborns that we have said is going to be Ephraim. Because Israel will survive in the land of affliction, in the material world, in the future. So this choice of Jacob, our father, is very, very important and makes perfect sense. That Ephraim in the future is going to live in the land of affliction, which is all the againstness, everything that is going to be against Israel, the exile, the assimilation into the nations by Ephraim and the, as we said, 9 more tribes, completely assimilated in the exile. In the future, which actually is a few generations later, as we know, after the exodus from Egypt. That's the destiny. It's like God has made me fruitful in the land of my affliction. In other words, no matter what's going to happen with us in the exile, our connection with God still remains. So we are fruitful because God is with us in the land of our affliction. In other words, all the negative situations and circumstances in which we live, they don't necessarily mean that we're going to die, that we're going to fail. Not all the opposite. We're going to be fruitful. We're going to succeed. We're going to prevail. So we have to understand it is a positive tone. God has made me fruitful in the land of my affliction. So yes, this happened to Joseph in Egypt, but we have to understand it in our consciousness and also in the future life of Israel later in the exile. So it's like no matter how afflicted we are going to be living in exile, we still will be fruitful. By fruitful, again, is based on our connection with God. God has made us fruitful. So this is based on a connection. Our connection with God is very important. So we have to pay attention to that. As long as we are connected with God, that we're doing His commandments, that we are emulating His ways and attributes, God makes us fruitful, even if we're afflicted in a land that is not ours. Good, so let's continue reading. Then the 7 years passed, and then the issue became for Joseph's family in Canaan. You know, it was all the famine started spreading all over the place. And then they have to come to Egypt to buy food in order to survive. So it's interesting because, again, we're talking about that the sustenance of life is love. The true sustenance of life is love. So we're going to look for the food, for the material sustenance of life in Egypt from Joseph. So it's like both the material sustenance, the material food that sustains life, is provided by one who represents the spiritual sustenance of life, which is love, God's love. In this case, love as the material manifestation of God's love. So then this is the interaction between Joseph and his brothers. The brothers came to Egypt, they didn't recognize him. Now, this sounds pretty obvious. Many years have passed. Joseph was sold when he was 17 years old. So he's older now. So then he changed physically. So his brothers didn't recognize him. Now, we have to go a little deeper on this. So yeah, that's pretty obvious, you know, a lot of time passed, 22 years. So a person can change to the point that not being recognized by anybody except himself. But again, we still have to see it in a deeper way. As we mentioned in our commentary in the blog, we have 3 commentaries on this portion. The brothers who sold him out of jealousy, hatred, cruelty, didn't recognize him. So it's like these are the qualities that do not recognize God's ways, love's ways and attributes. And yes, God's ways and attributes too, which are against cruelty, jealousy, and hatred, are completely opposite to his ways. So it's like we see that the brothers were not precisely with God, and God was not with them, as God was with Joseph. Otherwise, the Torah would have told us, and God was with Joseph's brothers. It doesn't say anywhere. Was with Joseph. So there's something special about this son, this brother, that God's spirit is with him. So something has to be good. So the goodness of God is with him. But then, yet, his brothers didn't recognize him. Just like kind of remaining of that cruelty, that jealousy, that hatred, they remain in them to the point that they didn't recognize any goodness in this character, nor as the brother, nor as a person. So it's like this is interesting teaching that we have to grasp. He said, when we don't have anything, when we don't have a quality, when we lack the quality of generosity, for instance, we can't see it anywhere. We can't, not really. Even if we see a person who is generous, we don't see that the person is generous. We see him or her as something like us, like, okay, this guy is doing it for a purpose. He's being generous because he's looking for something. We cannot see with the same objectivity outside what we don't have inside of us. So it's like if we are good, we are able to recognize goodness in others, no matter what. No matter how he or she is dressed. So it could be indigent, or it could be fashion model. Then we'll be able to see if this person is generous. We will see it because we know the reference. So it's something beyond the looks. It's something that we can perceive. It's not about feeling either. This is an inner perception that our generosity within us is connecting to the generosity in the other person. And then we connect and we recognize each other. So I recognize you. I can recognize your goodness. But first we have to have that reference clear, settled, grounded, rooted in our consciousness, in our being, for us to see it outside. So, he recognized his brothers, but his brothers didn't recognize him. Then the process of learning starts. The rest of the book of Genesis, the rest of the story of Joseph and his brothers is about a learning process. As we said, love doesn't cohabit with anything different from its ways and attributes. So it's like, yes, they're my brothers, but I'm not going to relate to them with that evil and wicked as they used to be when they sold me 22 years ago. That's the voice of love. This is not the voice of a resentful person. It's like these guys need to learn something that they have forgotten. And then the rest of the two following last portions of the book of Genesis are about that learning. Joseph has to make sure that his brothers are righteous, loving, generous, compassionate, like him, like Joseph. So this is not about, I'm going to take revenge. It's, I want to make sure, says Joseph, that goodness has to prevail. So in order to make goodness prevail, we have to make sure that everything is good. There is no hidden wickedness, evil, envy, cruelty, jealousy, hatred. No. Again, the rest of the story is about clearing the way for the connection, the reunification harmonically of the entire family. And it's interesting because we will see in the last of the story, the narration, that up until the death of their father, when they went to bury him, some of the brothers still believed, still didn't recognize who Joseph was. They doubted him. This guy cannot be this good. So they were afraid. Now father is dead, we bury him, this guy is going to take revenge, retaliate on us. So we see that this lack of recognition, of knowing Joseph is something that we're going to carry later as people. So we really have to find the firstborn essence of us as Israel in Joseph's qualities, traits and qualities. That's the birthright, the extension of Israel. So we have to pay attention to that. These are the generations of Jacob, Joseph. That's the reference. So we have to know who Joseph is. So the 4 last portions of the Torah tell us about him. So we know him, what he's capable of doing. That God's Spirit is with him. That he rules over Egypt. That he saves an entire nation and an entire part of the world from famine. That's Israel. That's Israel's firstborn. That's Israel's generations. Joseph. So the rest of the tribes, the rest of the children, which represents different qualities that we have mentioned in the blog, Levi, the priesthood, Judah, royalty, and other qualities, science, knowledge, leadership. Commerce, warriors, artists. We all have to be together in these 3 main pillars of Israel's, the spiritual, so to speak, identity, the priesthood, the royalty, and the birthright, as the foundations of our connection, our permanent connection with God. So all the tribes have to be together around this tree. But the idea of these 4 portions of the book of Genesis that tell us about Joseph is about the reference, the birthright that we have to be. So Joseph is our paradigm, the reference, the goal to be, to have, and to do as Israel. And then we have to bow to Him. It's not about bowing, but like it's recognizing that that's our true essence and identity. That we have to be loving, caring, compassionate in order to save humanity and to save life. And then the brothers, the rest of the skills, talents, creative potential, powers represented by the rest of Jacob's children have to work towards that same purpose that Joseph represents. That's essential. Okay, so we end our commentary of this week's Parshat Mikeitz with these thoughts to reflect, all of us. Let's bring all this awareness, let's turn this awareness of love's ways and attributes as the lights that we celebrate this week and next week in Hanukkah. Make these lights be part of our essence and identity. These lights that means love's ways and attributes, each one of them, every day, to light permanently as our connection with God. Let's remember that the lights that we are celebrating are the lights of the menorah in the temple during the Greek invasion. The lights of the temple, which represents our connection with God. The light that prevails no matter what, as long as we are aware of our connection with God. They will always light in our consciousness, in our nation, in our people, in the world. So have a blessed rest of the week. Hag Sameach, Shabbat Shalom, and until next time.